From the moment Claudius's nephew ascended Rome's imperial curule chair, the public vilification of his uncle Tiberius spread like wildfire. From the Forum Romanum, tales of Tiberius's cruelty and sexual perversions travelled across land and sea, growing more salacious with each retelling, until even the farthest frontiers of the empire repeated them as truth. The man who, in the entirety of his life, had loved only one woman, had never known a mistress, and had fathered no illegitimate children, was suddenly, as he closed in on the age of 80, recast as a lech whose sexual appetites rivaled the stamina of a Greek Olympian. All those boys once summoned to the island of Capri, political hostages held to ensure the loyalty of their fathers, were no longer remembered as prisoners, but as the emperor's playthings, trained, or so the stories claimed, to pleasure him in the baths. Now the island of Capri had a new name, Gregum Caprarem, the goat's nursery, the island where children were taught by Tiberius himself, guided by a library of manuals filled with erotic instructions to mimic the mating of goats. And those who displeased him, for any reason, were hurled from Capri's cliffs, their bodies shattered on the rocks below. And should any survive the fall, Tiberius stationed men with clubs to finish the task. Their bodies, left to rot, served as warning to others. It was all too easy, thought Claudius. Men would believe anything, the grotesque, the obscene, the impossible, so long as it was said of Tiberius. Not only was his time on Capri reframed in the most unflattering light, but the whole of Tiberius's reputation underwent the most severe savaging. The mutinies in Pannonia and on the Rhine, unrest that had begun in the final days of Augustus's reign, when length of service was too long, were now recast as the legion's unwillingness to follow such an evil and corrupt princeps. The death of Claudius's brother, Germanicus, was also laid firmly at the feet of Tiberius, and his widow, Agrippina, who had done nothing but innocently mourn her husband, was wickedly destroyed by the jealous emperor through the agency of Sejanus. The official story surrounding Caligula's brothers, Nero and Drusus, had also changed. Drusus, once accused of betrayal, was now cast as wholly innocent. He had not turned against his brother in pursuit of the throne, nor had he been a sexual deviant. He was simply the victim of trumped-up charges laid by Sejanus, just one more casualty of Tiberius's jealousy toward the family of Germanicus, and the love the Roman people bore them. Claudius sighed. As Rome's second emperor, Tiberius had the great misfortune of following a god. How could he be anything but a disappointment? Now Caligula, Rome's third emperor, and the great-grandson of that first emperor god, decided what was true, and Claudius, whose only crime had been surviving Tiberius, could do nothing about it. Although the lies about Tiberius had spread easily enough, what was harder to ignore was the speed with which Caligula was reshaping the realm of Rome's sacred. Caligula had not only buried the former regime, he had anointed a new priesthood to take its place. He began with the women of his household, his 3 sisters, whom he named as honorary Vestal Virgins, and his grandmother Antonia, who was awarded the sacred title of Augusta. These gestures were not merely honours, they were religious consecrations, acts that elevated the house of Germanicus above the Senate, above the old nobility, even above the past emperor who had failed to preserve it. In one stroke, Caligula had not only rewritten the story of their suffering, he had transformed their memory into a new religious order. The house of Germanicus was fast approaching the divine. From there, honor and worship began to blur. Statues were raised not only of Caligula, but of his sisters, placed in temples alongside the gods. Coins were minted bearing their likenesses. In the East, where kings had long ruled by divine right, the transition was seamless. Provincial priests began to include Caligula's name in public prayers, sometimes ahead of Jupiter's. Offerings were made not to Rome or the gods above, but to the living bloodline of Augustus, restored through Germanicus, and now exalted in Caligula. And to legitimize Germanicus, who shared no blood with Augustus, Caligula proposed the construction of a temple in honor of Livia Drusilla, wife of the divine Augustus and grandmother to Germanicus. Even Claudius's friend, Herod Agrippa, had a role to play in Caligula's divine strategy. Years earlier, Agrippa had fallen into disgrace, burdened with debts totaling 300,000 drachmae. For over a decade, Claudius's mother, Antonia, had done nothing to assist him. And then, quite suddenly, she paid the sum in full, not out of affection, but because Tiberius was old and dying. With the line of succession uncertain, her grandsons Caligula and Gemellus both in the running, Antonia secured Herod's loyalty the Roman way, through obligation. For her 300,000 drachmae, she purchased his allegiance to the next regime, whichever grandson prevailed. Caligula immediately named Herod Agrippa king of Batanea, Trachonitis, Gaulonitis, Auronitis, Paneas, and Iturea, territories that had once belonged to the tetrarchy of his uncle, Herod Philip, the same Philip whom Agrippa's sister, Herodias, had divorced in order to marry Herod Antipas. Months after his imprisonment under Tiberius, Herod Agrippa, now elevated to rule a significant portion of Judea, was expected to serve a new purpose, to help soften Jewish resistance to Rome's imperial cult. And to that end, he was dispatched to Alexandria, where tensions between the city's Jewish and Greek populations were beginning to boil over. But not all fell in line with Caligula's vision for Rome. Claudius's mother, Antonia, the same woman who had blindly spent 300,000 drachmae securing Herod Agrippa's loyalty for the reign of her grandson, had not expected her investment to fund blasphemy, nor to watch the imperial line imperiled by Caligula's marriage to a woman unlikely to bear an heir. When her grandson bestowed upon her the sacred title of Augusta, Antonia refused it outright and turned her back on the divine illusion he was creating. A few days later, she was dead. It appeared as though she had taken her own life, but how could Claudius be sure, when offence alone became more and more dangerous, and some poisons were almost impossible to detect? The visit was unexpected. Claudius's freedman, Antonius Pallas, bequeathed to him upon his mother's death, made the announcement. "The Lady Domitia Lepida requests an audience," he said. Claudius's brow furrowed. Both Domitia Lepida sisters were his cousins, daughters of his mother's sister. But aside from recent family gatherings honoring the ascension of Caligula, they had never been close. Claudius nodded. "Show her in." When Pallas returned, 2 women followed him into the tablinum, Lepida, the younger of the Domitia sisters, and a girl of such stunning beauty that Claudius could scarcely look away. Her name was Valeria Messalina, Lepida's 17-year-old daughter. Claudius's eyes narrowed. A young girl brought to meet a man by her parent could mean only one thing. A betrothal negotiation was about to take place. But why would Lepida consider throwing such a beautiful girl at him? "There is something strange going on," Lepida began, as if answering Claudius's unspoken question. "And I don't want my daughter drawn into it. I want Messalina settled, with someone responsible, before she gets swept up in Caligula's never-ending parade of wine and orgies. Claudius said nothing. He let Lepida do the talking. "Did you know my sister-in-law is finally pregnant?" she asked, her voice sharp with scorn. 6 years she gave my brother nothing, then a few parties into Caligula's reign, and suddenly she's with child. But I know what happens at those parties, what goes on with Agrippinilla and her sisters. By day they're sacred and inviolable, untouchable. But at night, she's touched by a good many, I'd say. She's taken a fancy to some handsome young man named Tigellinus. Do you know him? Probably not. And he's not her first. Drusilla and Livilla are just as bad, both married, both carrying on like harlots. And what can their husbands do? Their persons are legally sacrosanct. Claudius looked at Messalina, seated dutifully beside her mother, hands folded, mouth closed. He drew a breath and finally spoke. "Why me?" he asked. Lepida's lips pursed. "Because you and I are family. In Marcus Antonius and Octavia, we share grandparents. We share blood." Then she looked away. "And I don't want Caligula's eye to fall on my daughter, not with any Thrasilla watching. Macro's already come for my family once." She then looked at Claudius, her eyes pleading. "I would feel safer knowing my family was allied with yours. If it pleases you, I'll even betroth my son, Faustus, to your daughter, Claudia." Claudius nodded his understanding. It wasn't a bad idea. With the passing of Tiberius, he was the last of the Claudians, and he, too, needed allies. After all, it wasn't as if Caligula was showering divine honours on poor old Uncle Claudius. His eyes slid to Messalina, demure, well-mannered. Why not? She seemed to possess all the best traits of a noble wife.